Welcome to the Hourly Podcast, where we dive deep into the stories of leaders who are shaping the future of work and organizational culture. I'm your host, AJ Rikiki, and today we have the remarkable Rasheeda Clark, president of Flynn Group, Wendy's. Rasheeda brings us through their journey from playing in the WNBA to advanced auto parts and even Pepsi. Among insightful stories from the front lines, Rasheeda shares invaluable lessons to teach us all how to better recruit, retain, and most importantly, humanize the hourly workforce. I thoroughly enjoyed today's conversations and deeply respect Rasheeda's viewpoints on the space. Enjoy. All right. Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast here today. I'm so excited to have an opportunity to speak with you. I've read about you. We've had a few conversations, but to have it recorded and for others to tune in on is something that I'm really looking forward to. And I know our listeners and our readers will be chomping at the bit. So thanks so much for taking the time here today.
Absolutely. A pleasure and an honor to be here with you today, AJ. Really looking forward to the conversation. Was extremely excited when you reached out. And quite honestly, like I said, just been looking forward to the time together.
Yeah, I feel like I've been fanboying over you and your profile and your career for a very long time, and that's mutually exclusive to your experience with sports. So, I mean, I thought that'd be a great place to start. You know, you being a world-class athlete, paving the way in the WNBA before getting into hiring and recruiting. How do you go from that to where you are today? Give us a brief overview of who you are and how you got to this point today.
Yeah, I think it's a great place to start. And
Yeah.
you and I had a couple of conversations ahead of time, but when you think about professional sports, collegiate sports, the amount of transferable skills that you're learning in that space, it just is a high level of correlation to what we do in any large business where you have cross-functional work groups or teams. So for me personally, it's something that post my professional career that I was naturally inclined to go do, right? And I sort of dove headfirst into leading large teams. So, from enterprise to Target, which was a very traditional operational environment, into Frito-Lay and Pepsi. And I really would say like Pepsi being there for 10 and a half years was really where I got my footing with respects to leadership and the dynamics when you lead sort of multi-generational teams, very complex as far as customer interactions. It's just for me where I did a lot of growing up and a lot of skills that I resource and tap into today. And it really to a place where I feel like I've landed with Flynn Group, where longevity, long term sustainability with a group that really embraces the mindset of caring genuinely for people. And it really has been an exciting ride. So for me, I look at it as, it's everything that came before really prepared me for the challenge that is at the doorstep today, which is elevating Flynn Group to, the premier franchise operator in the world.
Yeah, and I mean, hopefully, and a lot of our listeners come from franchising. They all know about Flynn. Give us like a high level overview. How many locations is it in? What brands are you in? Some of the things that make the brand great.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'll start with number one. What makes this brand great?
I love the
It's the
excitement, just like an immediate jump up, like ready to go talk about Flynn. I
yeah,
love it. Good.
it really is. I mean, I always say, if you are authentic and genuine,
Yeah.
having these moments to talk about what it is you do and the people that you have the pleasure to work with it's exciting, right? It really is. And at Flynn Group, like I said, I'll start with it's the people. That make this organization great at Flynn Group. And when you think about our size, it's call it 3,000 locations in the brands. We have Panera, we have Applebee's, we have Pizza Hut, Arby's, of course, Wendy's, Planet Fitness. We just acquired, and then the international business for Wendy's in New Zealand as well as Australia. So it's a very dynamic set of restaurants, and Greg Flynn and Lauren Cortina, Brad Pettinger, and Ron Bellamy really have been dynamic in how they've grown the brand. When you think about the macroeconomic pressures at different times over the course of the 25-year history of Flynn Group, it really is positioned for success, right? Depending on those consumer habits that you tend to see at different points throughout the the journey,
Yeah.
right?
And to
Yeah.
continue the sports analogies, I always like to think of Flynn truly as that top tier, the New York Yankees of the franchise space, right? It's like when you have been called up to the Yankees, right? That's a call that you say, okay, when am I pitching, right? And so
That's right.
talk to us a little bit about what your role is specifically, because I know you oversee a particular brand, and
That's
what's
right.
your day to day like to help our listeners kind of get context into it all.
Yeah, for me personally, I am the brand president for the Wendy's brand at Flynn Group.
Mm,
The Wendy's brand was acquired back in 2021 by way
right.
of the MPC acquisition that came over with Pizza Hut locations as well as Wendy's locations. We have roughly 200 sites, and it's $500 million business, and we operate in 5 states. Right. And when you think about how I lead the business, I have a team of wonderful directors that oversee our restaurants. We have area directors, directors of operations, and then we have an amazing support team, with the majority of those leaders sitting out of the Overland Park area. And a typical day in this business is really trying to find as much time as possible to be in the restaurants with the team, shoulder to shoulder,
Right.
and inspiring them, right, to sort of achieve that next level of premier service. And at the end of the day, I mean, it's a battle for the customer and the guests, and it comes down to how does your team feel day to day working within the four walls of the restaurants, and we're responsible for creating those experiences for our team members. So, that's for me. It's being in those restaurants with my directors is where I prefer to spend the majority of my time.
Yeah, and incredible segue into kind of the purpose of the podcast. The purpose of the book is the humanization of the hourly worker, giving them tools to be successful, but also give insights to operators to, ideas of how to optimize their output, make sure they have a strong cohesive culture, grow organically in the from unit to unit. And I've gathered through our initial conversations that culture is very important to you, building within the restaurants, especially when you're managing 200 sites. You don't have much time to sleep, right? So when you first came to the job, I know it didn't come necessarily from QSR. You were at Advanced Auto Parts, right,
That's
beforehand.
right. Yeah.
What were some early culture lessons you learned being in the restaurants versus other retail locations?
Yeah, that's a great question. Number one, it's the pace of QSR, man. I mean,
Right.
it was probably the number one most important thing for me to learn, because the pace is so fast. You have to find ways to be impactful quickly
Yep.
when you're inside the restaurant, right? I mean, you think about uh, um, restaurant general manager, assistant manager, shift lead down to the crew. They're moving and grooving when you're in that restaurant. So for me, it was finding a way to not feel like I was getting in anybody's way, but be able to connect it meaningfully, so that they understood me as a leader in the direction, my vision for the organization. So for me, that was like number one, that was
Right.
probably the toughest thing. That pace is like nothing else I've ever seen in
Yeah,
any of my experiences.
and so, a lot of our listeners, mostly general managers at quick service restaurants, area directors, franchisees, they're very familiar with that pace. And that's a culture and a phenomenon in QSR that's um, important for the industry, but also very difficult for operators to try to recruit for and build a culture around, because it's not, despite what some people think of low job skill, very kind of easy first thing out of school mentality, this is a very challenging job for people. It's high
Hmm.
stress, it's high volume. And if you're not on your toes and you're not really energetic, it can be a very difficult environment. And when there's a war on talent, there's a tendency for the average, if you will, to not gravitate towards difficult work situations where they may say, hey, I can work from home, do a call center. I can work at other retail locations that aren't as stressful. What are some early things that you've done or Flynn's identified as ways to recruit the right type of people that thrive in, I don't want to say chaotic because I don't think that's the right term, but fast paced environment inside the restaurants.
Yeah. When you take a look at recruiting, it really starts with number one, your RGM, the restaurant general manager, really have to have an understanding as to the dynamics of their current restaurant, right? And the
Right.
characteristics of their team and what it takes to be successful, right? It can't just be hiring because you have an opening and you need to fill a position, right? It has to be understanding the culture, which we have our core values that guide us, and caring genuinely for people is right at the top of that, right? And we
Yep.
understand, like, for the hourly worker, as well as just really your entire team within the restaurant, career advancement is becoming more and more important every single day. So you can't be hiring for the position that's open. You have to be hiring for the shift lead, right? For the assistant manager, for the
Yeah.
next RGN. And so we do utilize a couple of services and tools
Yep.
that allow us to, number one, you need a healthy pipeline,
Yep.
right? I mean, if you don't have a healthy pipeline, it sort of restricts, the number of candidates that's coming in, and so you may not even be getting a wide enough, casting a wide enough net within the geography where you're looking to hire. And
Yep.
then, secondly, we've been really big with the RGMs on calendarize the time, right?
Mm.
Set yourself up for success for those interviews versus, the candidate comes in and you're sort of multitasking. You didn't necessarily calendarize it. And so it's not a great experience. You're not able to dedicate 100% of your attention to the interview.
Yep.
So I think that's a big piece to it as well. And then, secondly, one thing we try to do regularly is ensure you're partnering with your area director when hiring RGMs. RGMs should be, RGMs should be partnering with their area director when they're hiring shift leaders, right?
Mm.
And so, to like, not necessarily going on the journey alone when you're selecting talent, and that's just to ensure that that you don't have the blinders on, right? You want to widen the lens out a little bit and get another perspective on the talent that you're bringing into the restaurant.
Yeah, and that speaks certainly to what I'm seeing in the field. What I've heard on this podcast is the first interface that you have with an applicant is so important, especially as
That's
the
right.
labor market gets tight. You have people that, albeit applying to a lot of jobs, so they do have a lot of opportunities to work elsewhere. And now with Gen Z and millennials, I'll poke fun at
Mm,
myself. We care more about having fun at work and being able to work with people you like than the money, right?
that's
And
right.
if I told my dad that, who's in the baby boomer generation, he'd look at me like I'm crazy because the old way of work, and I'm curious to hear if you agree with this, but the old way, and these are very broad brushes of work,
Yeah.
are you sacrifice for your family, you hate your job, you work 80 hours a week, but you get the white picket fence, American dream,
Yeah.
and you provide what's best for your family. And this next generation of hourly workers, which is now the majority of the hourly workforce, are thinking differently,
That's
right?
right.
And spending time and making them feel special. And I cringe a little bit when I say that, but I think it's the most accurate portrayal of what I'm seeing in the field. That makes the difference. A personal conversation, a completely focused interview, a sense of wanting in this hourly workforce where they're applying to mass jobs, they're getting automated messages, and there's not much personalization, to a group of technology users that can sniff out that sort of automation 2 miles away.
That's
And
right.
I think what might be interesting to hear from you is how do you manage, and you used it when you were talking about Pepsi, multi-generational teams, right? And the
Yeah.
hourly workforce and in restaurants specifically, you have 16, 18-year-old kids coming in, after high school versus, you have the career QSR workers that are now managers or area managers. How do you bridge that gap? Do you provide training? Is it just a constant conversation? What are some things you've seen be successful there?
Yeah. This question in particular, this is a real challenge that
Right.
exists when you consider, as you said, the multi generational composition of our restaurants is one of the biggest challenges in itself.
Yep.
And where it shows up the most, AJ, is and the ability to communicate effectively.
Mm,
Right. So, I mean, at the root of everything we do,
right.
literally, it is communicating a message that is well received and in a fashion that will inspire those to reach the highest levels of productivity.
Right.
Right. And so for us, a couple of ways that we've been able to sort of break through on that. Obviously, there's some things that tie into Employee Appreciation Week, right? We do that. I
Mhm.
think probably every company out there has something similar to that. But it's also getting creative and understanding what the younger generation is looking for, and that sense of belonging, the connectivity.
Right.
We also have game nights where the employees get a chance to bring in members of their family. We have
Oh,
game
cool.
night; they can
Yeah.
utilize their employee discount. But you have to create those moments outside of the heat of the moment where
Right.
you spend time getting to know your team, and those will not naturally occur unless you plan them at a higher level within the organization, right? So I think that there you have to assist with building and creating those moments where there's a chance for your team at all different levels. There's a
Yep.
chance for them to interact so they get to know more about one another, right? And there's another tactic that we just recently we put in place this year, which has been really fun and exciting for all of us, which is a all digital podcast. So
Mm,
similar to the podcast we're doing today, except you would have a digital avatar, right? And when you think about how some of the younger generation likes to communicate, I mean, it's Gen Z is, I mean, it's here, right?
yep.
It's everything digital, and so the podcast is an opportunity to provide updates to that generation in support of building healthier lines of communication across all levels in the restaurant. And on that platform, they get an opportunity to provide feedback. There's a really cool drawing for a pair of Jordans, right, which the team really, really likes.
Can I
Uh,
join
and
that?
yeah, yeah, you can join it too. You can join
Yeah.
it.
Love it. Love
Yeah,
it.
you
Keep
can join
going.
it too. Yeah. So it really has been a lot of fun, and that feedback is then sort of cascaded down to the area directors as well as the RGMs, and that feedback's coming straight from our crew members,
Mm.
right? So it's so valuable. And we actually have our recording for we do it on a quarterly basis. That recording is coming up tomorrow.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We had another guest on, the VP of culture at an organization called Parkland, which they have about
Mm,
200 C stores here in the United States, and they do a monthly podcast, and they always have executives, sometimes the hourly crew members themselves, come and talk about company news because for the same reason you just mentioned, um, you know, people usually, sometimes even though we don't want them to, have a headphone in when they're working,
that's right.
and if they're going to have that, and we know they're going to consume content there, why not provide insights and company news through that versus whatever they're currently listening to, Joe Rogan or whatever, right?
That's right.
So it's a good example though to your point of speaking the love language, right, of
That's
the
it.
hourly workers, which multi generationally is very very challenging.
Yeah.
But no, makes a ton of sense. Love that. And yes, if I can be entered in for those Jordans, please let me
I
know.
got you.
But
I
but
got you.
um talk to me a little bit about turnover, right? It plagues the QSR space. I think I saw a statistic on QSR magazine the other day. It's 144% annually. It's something that I don't think will ever get down to zero by any means. And there is good turnover in quick service restaurants. That's something for us always to remember, right? Somebody goes off, he goes to school, somebody gets
That's
promoted
right.
into a general manager position, somebody earns their way through to another opportunity. But there is a case of bad turnover. So when
Mhm.
you think of that within your business, what are some things that you do proactively, maybe reactively, to reduce the amount of instances there? And because, as you know, very expensive and very burdensome for the restaurant at the ground level.
Yeah, yeah. So when you take a look at turnover, something we're really proud of in the Wendy's brand for Flynn Group is we currently hover right around the 128. So
Nice.
beneath like the industry
Yeah, definitely.
standard number that you just referenced, and we feel like contributing factors uh, to that would be number one. career mapping, having career
Mm,
development programs is critical. We know that the hourly worker is looking to improve reliability, sustainability within the job space.
yep.
Most of your hourly workers are working multiple jobs, right?
Hmm.
Which that negatively impacts work-life balance. So career advancement is so critical, and not just that. I mean, how uplifting and inspiring is it to be able to present someone that came in at the crew level an opportunity to progress into area director, and then kind of expanding right on that would be we have a storytelling series. I mean, it's one thing to speak about it, but raising visibility and awareness to examples of it that are real within your organization
Yep.
are inspiring as well. So we have a storytelling series where leaders at the area director level that started at crew, it's a video series. They share out their experience, and
Very
that's
cool.
shared across the organization. So I think it's those are two things that when you think about at the Flynn Wendy's level that we do extremely well. The other piece that I want to hit on really comes down to like the leadership dynamics, right? And the
Hmm.
rhythm of your team, which is ensuring that we show up, right, in a fashion that says we care about our people, right? It's one thing for
Yep.
folks to like have this desire for inclusivity, but the way our leaders show up determines how our team feels,
Yep.
right? And unfortunately, at QSR, like I tell my team all the time, like we don't get a chance to have a bad day, right?
Mm.
And when we show up to the restaurants, we don't.
Right.
So if you are kind of having a bad day, maybe that's an office day for the day. But when you
Right.
show up to the restaurants, we got to
Yep.
be on,
Right.
right? That's it.
Yeah. Especially when you're dealing with younger crew members that don't are new to the job, new to career. They're looking to the leaders to be able to establish how to act on good
That's
days
right.
and bad days, right? So shining through examples, love that. One thing that you mentioned around career mapping and being able to move up through the organization, something that I'm really passionate about, and I got to speak about this at an event, and a mother asked a question when I was on stage and said, "Okay, AJ, if you had a high school degree, you didn't have many options, what job would you take? And how would you be able to progress your life?" And I told her with a straight face, I said, I would join as a crew member of a QSR restaurant and I would rock that job and I would show up and I would outwork everybody because that is the fastest path in America to $100,000 to $200,000 to $300,000. And I've been amazed at the programs of amazing companies like Flynn that make that a reality, right? And it's
That's
actually
right.
made me question when I think about like having children of like I have children of my own as to what path I want them to take because it is a very strong alternative and arguably, and I think the data would suggest, faster path to six figures than going through traditional high school, college, like all these different things. So I think it's just such an exciting thing, and I've always been surprised of how little it's actually talked about or leveraged in the individual restaurants, but really awesome to hear that Flynn, you guys are talking about it not just in the hiring motion, but on day 1, on day 30, on day 90, and they have access
That's
to these
right.
things. They can see how they can really achieve these things if they want it enough, right? And
That's
it's
it.
all about walking the walk and talking rather than talking the talk. Um, as you know. But you did say something I do want to touch on
Yeah.
inclusivity, right? I know in our previous conversations, DEI initiatives super important for you and for Flynn. Talk to me a little bit about that. What's your passion come from, and what are some things that you've seen be successful in this field to ensure that we have an equitable hiring process and overall management style?
Yeah. Now, this could be another podcast in itself,
There's
AJ. I
there's
want
a
to tell
whole
you
chapter.
this.
There's a whole chapter in the book about it. So yeah, I I
Yeah.
I know. I know.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, it is part of my DNA,
Mm,
right? I think it really becomes it's the X factor, right?
mm,
When you understand the importance of inclusivity, where everyone within your organization feels heard, feels seen, feels valued. The impact that has across the business is tremendous. And for me, it really starts with number one with me. right? It
Yep.
starts with me as the president of the brand, because as you hit on something for me that really resonated, which is the team's always watching,
Right.
right? And the things that I make important will be important to them. Now,
Right.
we have to help facilitate how the message gets cascaded down to the restaurants, sure. But when I prioritize it, it becomes important to my team. When it's important to my team, it shows up in the restaurants,
Right.
right? And the RGM, which you and I have spoken about before, it's so important that the RGM is presenting that message with a level of passion and intensity to the team
Yep.
where they too understand that this is important, right? It's not just about
Yep.
burgers, fries, and frosties. There are also ways for me to engage with the local community within the programs that support my professional and personal goals, right? And the things
Hmm.
that priorities, the things that matter to me. So, a couple of ways we've been doing that, and I'll give you some examples. We
Yep.
have a leadership initiative that really supports, the you could call it hourly workforce. It supports the entire restaurant team, and what it does is it creates these moments for mentorship, for development, roundtables to gather insights and feedback from the team on what's working, what's not working in their experience,
Mm.
and that has been so helpful when you talk about giving the team a voice to feel heard and a platform to share their experience. And it's priceless information to understand how are we doing,
Right.
because oftentimes with DE&I programs, what happens, you do work, you do work, you do work, you do work, but is it making an impact,
Right.
right? And most times you see above store area director level and up that says, man, this is working, this is great, but it's really tough to get it down to the crew level, and some of that's impacted by turnover in itself, right, within that level, within the organization in the restaurant. So the leadership initiative has been great. We also have a hypo program, and the
Hypo.
hypo, yeah,
Hypo.
hypo,
How do you spell
H,
that?
capital H, lowercase I, capital P, and
Okay.
it's in lowercase O, and it
Oh.
stands for high potential. Okay,
Mm. Got it.
high potential. So sort of going back to what you just mentioned, right? If
Yep.
if you don't have a degree, you come out of high school, do you come in there and you rip it and you kill it
Yep.
at the crew member level, and then you progress your career forward? That would be considered like a high potential or a hypo member of your team that you would put in this program.
Got
And
it.
the really cool thing about this program is it meets the employee where they are. Okay,
Mm.
it meets the employee where they are. We have a base curriculum, and it's a 7 to 8 week course, right? And they're going to be sort of building their capability, going through these courses, picking up the tools that it takes to be successful in the next role. But then there's another component, so that it's not just a blanket program. We really
Hmm.
tailor it to the market to say, what are some of the skills that are opportunities based on the feedback we've received from the leadership initiative? That could be Outlook, that could be PowerPoint, that
Yep.
could be Microsoft Word, it could be Excel based, it could be P&L based.
Yep.
And then we build out trainings essentially to help close down those gaps for the employees.
That's
Right.
incredible. And is
So
that through Wendy's Global or is that a Flynn
Flynn,
restaurant initiative?
Flynn,
Okay.
Flynn, Flynn. Yes, Flynn.
Very cool. So
It's
if
Flynn. Yeah.
somebody who's listening, may not have the size, scale, resources of a Flynn
Mhm.
and wanted to adopt a similar sort of program, what are some early learnings you had of developing that, or some insights you might have as to how somebody can pull that off with fewer resources?
Yeah, with fewer resources. You know what? Being completely transparent, right? Whether it's innovation, whether it's some of
Right.
what we just mentioned, CapEx is oftentimes the roadblock, right?
Mm.
It's like, what tools do I need to go out and invest in order to execute this within my restaurant? This is something that really just says, hey, you find someone within your organization that is passionate about leadership and development and sponsorship, and you have this individual sort of lead the initiative. Now, I don't think it's so much of the size of the program, or excuse me, the size of the organization to execute the program. It really comes down to how do you phase it out, right? It may not
Mm,
be 7 to 8 weeks for a smaller organization.
yeah.
Maybe it becomes a 10 to 14 week program and you take smaller chunks, right? So it's
Yep.
digestible and something that you can commit to. And the number one thing I would say is if you're dealing with limited resources, I say it's building a timeline and phasing out the work in a manner that you can commit to it. There's nothing worse than starting something and not finishing it, and it's the easiest way to burn trust with
Yeah.
with your team, right? And make people feel like, I knew it. They weren't really vested in us,
Yep.
right? So to
Yeah.
avoid that, it's the most critical piece, right? Just understanding for your organization and your size, what is realistic to commit to deliver it in a premier fashion. Bottom line.
Yeah, love it. And unfortunately, we are coming up on time. This I feel like could go for 6 more
I
hours, and
know.
we're
This
gonna
has been
have to.
awesome.
I'm sure our listeners are gonna have a lot of follow-up questions, so we might have to do a part 2 of this.
Yeah, I love it.
But it sounds awesome. But I do ask every single person who comes on as a guest the same question, and it's 2 parts. 1A is what was your first hourly job, and 1B, were you terminated or did you leave said job?
I love it. This is such a great question.
Yeah.
My first job was Carl's Jr., and I departed Carl's Jr. due to summer AAU basketball.
So how old were you? Where were you in the country? I feel like I need to know a little bit more here.
Yeah, yeah. So I was 16, and it was in Ontario, California, and it was the Carl's Jr. off of Vineyard Avenue on the 60 freeway.
Are
Yeah.
you still in touch with that manager, that operator by
No,
chance?
no, I'm
See,
not. Look,
that's my favorite
when the,
question to ask. I was with Natalie, and she was
yeah,
telling me about her first manager, and I said, "Well, have you ever thought about reaching back out and just being like,
yeah,
hey, like now I am the president of Flynn Wendy's in the
yeah.
industry in which I started. Like, what a cool full circle moment that could be for you."
Yeah.
So, uh,
Well, so check it out, AJ. It was in 1994,
okay,
and I didn't even have a cell phone. So
yep.
now I'm dating myself.
Yeah, too funny. Too funny. But no, thank you so much for being on the show. For those that want to get in contact or learn from you, is LinkedIn the best way to find you? And if you can, spell out your name for people who are listening and not able to see your name on the screen.
Absolutely. LinkedIn is the best way to get a hold of me. And first name, Rasheeda, Rash, 2 E's, D as in Daisy, A. Clark, Clark, no E.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. We really appreciate it. And we're looking forward to part 2 in the future. Awesome.
Sounds great. Thank you
All
so
right.
much for having me, AJ.
Perfect.